Karen Gershowitz. She's written the book Travel Mania. She's been to over 90 countries. At 17 years old, she's from New York. She went to London. First, she went to Amsterdam, then was in London, went to school there. We talk about Japan, Alaska, Tanzania, Mount Kilimanjaro. Wait till you hear that story. Thailand, the Galapagos Islands, Malaysia. The best Italian food that she's ever had outside of Italy. Where would you think that is? I'll give you one hint. South America. Wait till you hear the country. Indonesia, on her 40th birthday, she went and visited this local indigenous tribe that had these really, really cool ceremonies, and just a great conversation with Karen Gershowitz, Travel Mania. She's writing another book now, but she's a travel expert. She gives great tips on how to travel and what to do. The difference between being a traveler and a tourist. It's a very big difference. It's the first thing we talk about. You're going to love it. If you love to travel, even if you don't love to travel, but you want to know more about it, you're going to really like Karen Gershowitz. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, in their passion, in their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. I really enjoyed your book.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I really did. And I love to travel, So what's the difference between a traveler and a tourist?
A tourist is someone who has everything set up in advance. They know what they're going to do. They have an itinerary and they stick to it. A traveler is someone who goes because they want to understand the culture and have experiences. And yeah, I always go to the must-see places, and then I take the guidebook and I throw it away. And I wander and I explore and I just learn to do things that are not the prescribed, this is what you're supposed to be doing. So that's how I would define it. One's the itinerary and the other one is go explore.
How well can you get to know know a country if you're just kind of, doing just being a tourist? You're just kind of window shopping, I guess.
I don't think you can. I think you get to see things, but you don't get to really interact with people. And while the places are very interesting, it's the people and the food and the things that happen that are interesting, not so much the looking out the window and seeing a lovely landscape or, seeing a great building, all of which are perfectly nice and I like doing it. But to me, that's not traveling.
Can you really understand a culture without knowing at least part of the language?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've traveled all over the world. You've read in the book, I've been to 90 countries.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to get to 100. But, but I only speak English fluently. I speak really bad Spanish. I usually describe it as I speak like a not too bright 5-year-old. But people can understand me, but it's, it's a little dicey. what I've discovered is, first of all, you can always find someone who speaks English, or
Mm,
most places.
mm.
It's certainly nowadays you can. When I first started traveling, that was not true. Um, but people will interact with you in any way they can. It's funny, I'm writing a second book now, also travel stories.
Mm.
And one of the stories that I tell in it is about being in Seoul, Korea, and going to the silk market. Now, the friend who I was traveling with is a quilter. Absolutely, mad about it, and she was determined to go to the silk market, which is enormous. It's the size of easily a football field,
Mm.
maybe two. The building has 2 floors with 5,000 vendors, so just
Wow.
wrap your head around that one. And we're wandering through, and one of the guys stops her, and I watch as he speaks no English, she speaks no Korean. They get into a conversation. She
Mm.
explains that she wants to do a quilt, and she does a little drawing. And he starts giving her a lesson on how to sew this very slippery silk. They went on for about 25 minutes.
Wow.
And at the end of it, I mean, she bought a bunch of silk, and at the end of it, he was bringing out all the scraps that he had. And she's going, "Oh, that's beautiful." Puts it on the pile. He gave it to her as a gift because he
Wow.
had had such a good time. And things like that happen all over the world, whether you speak the language or you don't, if you're open to it.
That's a wonderful story. That's just wonderful. And were there many non-Koreans at this market?
We didn't see anybody.
Right.
We were it. Um, Downstairs where there's a food hall, there were some, not very many, but some non-Koreans. But for the most part, certainly up where the silk was, and the entire floor is silk. There's
Really?
nothing else. Um, there was no one else who was not. I'm not a sewer, so I was wandering around, you know, very carefully taking note of where I was because I thought I'm never going to find my way back to where my friend is. We're going to get lost forever. But in one of the little booths, they make these outfits for kids for some celebration. I honestly don't know what the celebration is. And I watched them, and then they started asking me for my opinion about it. Do you like this one better or this combination?
Mm.
And I'm trying to be very objective because I'm not, what do I know? Um, but they were determined to get me into this, and we just had a great time. Again, being open to it and being in places where the locals are, it's pretty hard not to get involved with people and have those kinds of experiences. And it happens all the time, and it has happened to me all over the world.
Very, very interesting. I know my father is Italian, and I've been to Italy many times. I know you have, and whenever somebody goes, I always give these same tips, and I wonder if they kind of transfer to other places. I say when you're asking for somewhere to eat, ask the police because pretty everybody else gets paid. Maitre d's, taxi drivers. The police don't care.
Right.
Uh,
Well, that's not always true, and I'll tell you a
ah,
story about that one.
please.
Not in Italy, but in Turkey. We
Hmm.
had we had rented a car and we were driving along the southern coast of Turkey. And the police periodically stop everyone. So they stop us and he asks for our passports and he sees that we're Americans. And he says to us in English, I might add,
Hmm.
"So where are you staying tonight?" "We're not sure yet." "Well, my brother's got a place,"
Oh.
and hands us his brother's card. So the police are not always infallible here.
That is hilarious. So they're doing marketing. They're doing road marketing. That's unbelievable.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was very funny. And the hotel was even funnier because we were there really pre-season. I think we were there in early April and it was still cold and we nothing's really open yet. So we go to this hotel that he's recommended. Why not? We don't know from
Sure.
any of them. And the guy takes us up to a room that's absolutely lovely. And perfect. We're the only ones there. It's clear we are the only ones there. And my friend goes into the bathroom, and I hear a shriek. I
Uh-oh.
mean, an absolute shriek. And she comes out and she's laughing so hard she can't even tell me what the problem is. And I walk in and the U pipe in the sink is missing. So when she turned on the water, it all came flooding out. They were obviously doing repairs and he had forgotten. So we go get the guy and we're trying to explain. He's like, come, he doesn't speak any English. Like, stand here, turn on the water. Doesn't the and the water comes out and you go, ah. So he comes back with a bucket.
The mentality is just so different. It's
Oh yeah,
incredible. The mentality is just so different. Yeah. The other tip I have is when they're at restaurants, get the wine in the carafe. The local wine's just as good, less expensive than anything it kind of push in a bottle.
absolutely. That I do agree with. I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with that one.
Yeah. And if the menus are not in English, it's actually better.
Yeah. I mean, I I will ask a waiter, if you were gonna eat something tonight, which
Huh.
one would you get?
Right.
You know? Um, and sometimes where I've been in countries where, really I can't communicate with them, and it's, I'm in Japan or somewhere where that I can't even read the language, I've had people take me into the kitchen,
Huh. Very cool.
or I'll look around at what other people are eating and go, "I'll have that." Now, occasionally, I've gotten some very strange things, but it hasn't happened very often.
It's odd too in Europe because the staff doesn't expect tips. I
Correct.
mean, there's always that kind of awkward moment where we Americans are very used to that.
Yeah, well, it's awkward the other direction too when they come
Right.
here
Yes.
and they don't tip,
Right.
and the taxi drivers and the waiters are furious because, come on, guys, this is a tipping society.
Yeah, very different. So
Yeah.
when you were 17, you went to London.
Well, first I went to the Netherlands
Ah.
for a few months. Didn't particularly like it, and then I moved to London.
Now why didn't you like Netherlands?
I had gone there I was an art student, and I went to the Koninklijke Academia der Belkunst, which is the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, where I had gotten accepted, because I had a year at Pratt, and, so they somehow knew what that was.
Mm,
Um, at Pratt, it was, we're talking in the 60s. It was cutting edge, and it was, really avant-garde kinds of stuff, and I get there, and they're drawing from plaster busts and bowls of fruit, and I'm, like, bored out of my mind.
oh,
I mean, because I can draw very well, but to sit there and draw a bowl of fruit is not my idea of creating art. And it was like, I can't do this. This is just not what I want. And I got very lucky because when I went to London and I had no idea where I was going or what I was doing, I had a guidebook for students. And I went to one of the hotels that was listed. And as it turns out, I was height of the baby boom. I mean, the height of the baby boom. And it was also the height of the baby boom in England. And the university didn't have enough room in the dorms for all the students. So this particular hotel had become, for people who signed up late, became like a dormitory for the University of London.
hmm,
And I met a ton of people there. And someone there said, "Oh, you're an art student. You should go down to the Sir John Cass College of Art because I have a friend who goes there and the term has just started and you can probably get enrolled there." And which is what I did.
wow. Wow. And so you were in London for quite a while.
Yeah, 3 years.
Wow. And what was London like in 71, 72?
Oh, Carnaby Street
Hmm,
and, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and, all the craziness and people in mini skirts that were so short that they were kind of amazing, and boots and it was pretty crazy. People were, crazy in a different way than they were in the States.
hmm.
Um, there was virtually no drugs because the British were really strict on that. A lot of
Really?
drinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of drinking. You would go to the pub and hang out at the pub. I mean, I spent a whole lot of time in pubs when I was there.
Mm.
Um, but it was great fun. I had a fabulous time. I mean, it was just, and things were dirt cheap relative to New York, or relative, frankly, to anywhere in the United States. I mean, I used to go to the theater and sit up in what they call the gods. We would call it the nosebleed section. They call it the gods,
Hmm.
and and it would cost me 50 cents, 75 cents, and I got to see some of the best theater on the globe
Wow.
for nothing, basically, and go to concerts for about the same price. With the student pass, you could get anywhere,
Hmm.
and so it was great. And I I managed. I started in the ceramics program there, and the woman who ran the studio really liked me, and so she allowed me. Well, she hired me to work in her studio 2 days a week. So 3 days a week I went to classes, and 2 days I worked for her, and that was enough money to sustain me. So
Wow.
worked out
Wow.
really well.
Now, early 70s here in the States, the Vietnam War was kind of ending, and there was, there was flower children, and there was, protesting and these kinds of things, but that wasn't happening at all there in
No,
London.
no,
Yeah.
because Vietnam was not an issue.
Right.
Um, you had a lot of punks, and you had there were the greatest punk story I remember, and it still makes me laugh. Is there was a trend. People wore these really crazy hairstyles where they would put glue, not gel, glue into their hair and make these long, look like unicorn spikes, but they'd
Mm.
have a whole bunch of them in a row. And some guy did it and worked for, I don't know, the plumbers union or the electricians union, and they had to defend him. And that was the big news in London for about 3 months. And of course, that was the time of Margaret Thatcher,
Mm.
not as prime minister, but as in the House of Commons. And she did a lot of things that were getting people really upset. There were
Hmm.
huge strikes, but it was strikes because she decided that it was too expensive to give kids milk in school and
Wow.
like that. So every periodically, the underground would stop, or they would stop, picking up garbage, or the buses would go on strike, and everybody just kind of went, "Oh yeah, we're at it again."
Hmm. Fascinating. And then in 74, you went to Japan.
Hmm.
That's a
Yeah.
big switch.
Well, I went there. Um, it was a working vacation.
Right.
I'd come back to the States, and I was going to college out in Kansas City.
Hmm.
And the professor there who ran the ceramic studio um, went for the summer to Japan. And because that was considered to be and it is some of the finest ceramics on the globe. And he went to studios all over the country. And he came back and he was telling us these fabulous stories. He hadn't taken a single photograph. I mean, maybe he took two or three.
Wow.
And I thought, after that, I really wanted to go to Japan. I
Mm.
wanted to see it for myself, and which is usually what happens. I get curious about a place, and okay, now I got to go there.
Mm.
Um, but I had no money. I mean, I was really had no money, and I convinced the school to pay for all my travel,
Right.
which was great.
Oh, I read about that. It was great. Yeah.
But it was under the condition that I absolutely told no one.
Right.
So even the person who traveled with me had no idea that the school was paying for
Wow.
it. I'm very
Wow.
good at keeping secrets when I have to.
And a decent amount of hitchhiking
Oh yeah, yeah. Not in Japan, but in the States.
in
Did a
the
lot of
States, yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, in fact, almost didn't make the flight for Japan because I was hitchhiking to get to the airport.
A
Kind of
concept that the
dumb.
youth today will never understand, right?
No,
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 no, hitchhiking. Yeah, that's just when you go on a highway, you go on a road, you stick your thumb out and people pull over and give you ride places. That's pretty much it.
absolutely,
Yeah, it's that simple.
absolutely. And I
Yeah.
used to hitchhike all over Europe.
Wow.
I mean, all over Europe. That was at least half of how I got around.
Wow. And Japan in the mid 70s, what was that like? This is post World War II, obviously, baseball, and there was a lot of Americanization.
Yeah, well, there was, Basubaru, I love it.
Hmm.
That was how they that was baseball. Um,
Ah,
but there was no English except in Tokyo, and even in other major cities like Kyoto, you found no English.
wow.
Now you do, because 'cause I've been
Right.
back quite a few times, but there was absolutely 0 English anywhere, and it was a pretty closed society, but they were curious because it was very unusual for 2 Western women to be
Mm,
wandering around by ourselves.
mm,
Um, and people were, well, this is the thing that I say about everywhere. People want to be helpful. They're as curious about you as you are about them.
mm.
And, if you're going to London, it's one thing, but if you're going to somewhere that's remote, and we were going to all these ceramic studios all over Japan that were out in the wilds, they don't see many tourists, if any. So they were curious about us, and because we had an introduction to the studios, I had this, and it's in the book actually. I have a photo of myself and the person I was traveling with Ken, who was the ceramics head of the ceramics department, who had gone to Japan and why I went there. People saw that and they immediately wanted to help us, as a courtesy to him, because was a very, very well-known ceramicist.
Hmm.
So we kind of had entree into a lot of places.
And you got used to the food? Had you had Japanese sushi and these kinds of, seafood before then?
Absolutely.
Mm,
I grew up in New York City,
right.
and my mother was really, I mean, one of the reasons that I'm so curious is because of my mother. My mother um, had always wanted to travel, but we're Jewish, and in the 30s, traveling to Europe would have been a really bad idea.
Right, right.
So she never really got to travel, and then she had kids and she had some health issues. Um, so instead of doing that, we tried every cuisine that you
Hmm.
could find in New York. And we went to every performance from overseas that came into New York, and the museums, and you know, and right across from city center, um, in the 50s and in the 60s, was a Japanese restaurant.
Hmm.
And I remember we'd have all the cooked food. And one day my mother said, "We have to try sushi." I was like,
Right.
"We're gonna eat raw fish?" I was like, "We have to do this." And I loved it immediately.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Even as a kid. So
Hmm. And then in the 80s, you talk about Alaska and working for American Express and Denali. I mean, this is just beautiful.
yeah, yeah. Um, it was how much of this story should I tell? Because this is a very long
It's
story.
okay.
The I really needed to get away for a while, and
Mm,
I decided I was going to take a month's vacation, which you're not supposed to do. 2 weeks is it.
right.
That's what you get.
Even
But I
today.
read the handbook, and the handbook said you could take 2 weeks non-paid leave. Okay, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to take a month off. And after some, let us say, discussions about it, they agreed that I was allowed to do this. So I went off and I had joined a group, and I did not realize it when I joined it. I was the only American in the group. It was all Europeans and an Australian, very small group, and we camped all over um, the Yukon um,
Denali.
and Denali in Alaska.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was spectacularly beautiful. It was a very unusual group of people. It was great fun. Um, and then when we were in Denali, we decided that another woman and I that we were going to stay behind. The rest of the group was going into Anchorage, and I didn't particularly want to see Anchorage. I wanted to keep hiking. So we agreed that they would go ahead and we would take the train, because there's a direct train from Denali that goes into Anchorage 3 days later. And sorry, it's my
It's okay.
dog.
Yeah, it's okay.
Um, so we got on we were camping, and we wanted to see Denali. Denali is very, very often shrouded in clouds, and you just don't see anything.
Mm.
And so the whole time that the rest of the group was there, no one saw the top of Denali. And the first 2 days we were there, nothing. And the third day they said, well, maybe it'll clear. Okay, so we go back into the park, and it's not clearing, and it's not clearing, and there are two buses left to go back out to the campground. Um, should we wait and maybe it'll clear, or should we just take the earlier one? We decided to take the earlier one, and it's quite a hike into the park. So we're on our way back, and just as we're getting towards the campground and the lodge, we see sirens. We hear sirens, and we see ambulances and police screaming in the other direction.
Mm.
Well, it turns out that the bus behind ours pulled over to see bears. The road caved, and the bus rolled down the hill.
Oh, yeah.
And
Goodness.
2 or 3 people died, and everybody else was seriously injured. So it was one of those fate moments when you go,
Mm.
"Whew," you know, dodged a bullet that time.
Mm.
But the trip was great, and then
Mm.
we took the inland ferry down the Inside Passage and stopped in Juneau and a bunch of other places. Most people go on cruise ships. Well, we were on the ferry, which was an interesting experience. We camped on the deck, and it was like a nonstop party. It was people from all over the globe,
Mm.
and uh, and I took a flight. I'm not even sure I mention it in the book, but I took a flight. It was my one big splurge on the trip. I took a flight over the glaciers, and at that time they were still pretty pristine.
Mm.
It was one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen.
Mm.
Just I'd never really seen anything quite like it, and certainly not from the air. I've since seen glaciers down in Patagonia and some other places that are spectacular, but never from the air, and it's really amazing. So yeah, it was a really fun trip.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to take a helicopter tour over. I forget which glacier there in Alaska, but I still to this day have never seen that shade of blue ever
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah. It's the thousands of shades of blue,
Yeah.
and you know you think you know what blue is until you've
Right.
flown over. Or when I was in Patagonia, I was on I took a 5-day cruise through the Patagonian fjords on the Argentina side. And one of the days they took us on an ice cutter
Ooh.
into all the way into one of the fingers of the glaciers.
Wow.
And I've never seen anything like that. It was, again, as you say, this intense blue. The entire world is blue and white. There are
Mm.
no other colors,
Hmm.
and huge pieces come off. And between the rain and the wind, they get sculpted, and it's like you are going through a floating sculpture garden.
Wow.
It is astoundingly beautiful. And then they pull out a piece of ice from the water, and they start breaking it up, and they hand us all a cup with some chips of ice, and they pour some scotch over it and say,
Huh.
"You're now having 30-year-old scotch with 30,000-year-old ice."
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it
Wow.
was it was pretty astounding.
That is incredible. Yeah, and then it's amazing how your book and your stories that travel intermingles with family. You talk about going to Puerto Rico where your mother was ill and and shortly after New York she had passed, but like she was an atheist but she still prayed.
No, I
You
was praying.
yeah, you were
I'm an
praying.
atheist, but
Yes,
I was
you were
praying.
praying. Yeah. It's great how you open yourself up like this, and because you're traveling, you're showing part of your life, and you're showing more parts of your life as well. It's very nice.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Yeah.
had fun writing it, and I'm having fun writing the second one. And somebody said to me, "Aren't you going to run out of stories?" And I said, "Actually, no.
Yeah.
If you travel enough, There's a wonderful quote, and I don't have it exactly, but it's something to the effect of, "First, travel makes you wonder, and then it makes you a storyteller."
Mm.
And it's true. And I've been traveling, for scary number, over 60 years,
Wow.
so
I mean,
got a
you
lot of
write
stories.
yeah, you write a 100-word essay every day in Facebook about
I
different places
do.
to travel. It's incredible. I
I
mean,
do.
the amount of content you put out. 1983, you're in Tanzania and Kilimanjaro. You talk about getting a Sherpa. That was very, very cool.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Climbing Kilimanjaro is to this day one of the most, um, it was one of the most moving and one of the most life changing experiences I've had traveling.
Really?
And not, I think, for the reasons that people usually think of. It's it's not it Were it not at that altitude, it wouldn't be a difficult climb.
Mm.
Except for the very end. The very end's very steep, and the last cabin that you're in is at 15,500 feet.
Wow.
And then you go up to 18,300, I think. And I made it within a few hundred feet, and then I started throwing up. And when you start doing that, they hustle you back down because
Oh.
it's really dangerous. So I did not make it to the top, and I didn't care. It was the most zen experience I've ever had
Hmm.
because you have to be fully present. You don't think about anything else.
Mm.
You are in the moment so completely. And I've never had that experience. People say they get it when they meditate. I've never been able to.
Mm.
But that climb of Kilimanjaro absolutely put me into that state. And plus, it's parts of it are absolutely beautiful. I mean, the
Mm.
when you get through the rainforest and you're at the cabins, that night we went outside, and it's beginning to get very cold because you're at altitude, and the you're watching the sunset into the clouds.
Hmm.
So think about being on a plane and you see the sun setting, except
Right.
you're standing there.
Hmm.
What And the entire layer of clouds turns gold and then red.
Wow.
It's just breathtakingly beautiful. Uh, but it's something that really had a profound impact on me
Mm.
in a lot of ways. The idea of, Timothy Leary from the 60s, "Be here now."
Right.
Well, that was an absolute demonstration of "Be here now."
And then I've always wanted to go to Thailand. You talk about the elephants there. I know they've actually kind of curbed that a little bit now. You want to talk about that at all? And
Yeah, when I went, which was also in the 80s,
yeah,
um, the elephants um, used to do the farm work.
right.
And, when they were clearing forests and all of that. Um, and they decided when equipment came in that they really needed to do something with the elephants or they were going to get killed off. So, people have said to me, and, one day I posted about, going on an elephant trek, and people were up in arms about how
Mm,
terrible that is.
mm,
Well, at the time, it was not.
right.
It actually was considered to be um, kind of the right thing to do, and went on an elephant trek through um, the highlands way up in northern Thailand. And we really got to know the elephants, and they're clearly very intelligent
Mm,
animals, and they're very funny. Um, we had a mama and her baby who was trotting along beside us, and she was ushering him along, and it was really sweet to watch. And we rested a lot. It was not like they were working 10 hours a day.
mm,
It was pretty relaxed. And at one of the stops, um, they went into a lake, and the mahouts, who are the people who are um,
the locals.
the locals, yeah, were scrubbing them down, which they love.
Mm.
But periodically, one of them would get a trunk full of water and just spray the guy just because he thought it was funny, and you
Yeah.
could almost see them laughing. And then the guys were sitting there eating lunch, and I watched as one of the guys was talking, and he held his hand up, and he was holding some food and talking to another guy, and the trunk came around and grabbed the sandwich or whatever it was he was eating. And again, you could almost see the elephant laughing.
Right.
And
Beautiful.
they're very smart. They got to know us within an hour or two. And if I went to the wrong elephant, I'd have one of them, take a pat me. It's like, come over here.
Wow. Yeah, they're majestic creatures. Now the Asian elephants have the ears are just a little bit smaller,
Correct.
correct? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But they're beautiful animals. Really beautiful
Yeah.
animals.
And they're furrier than one would imagine. I remember petting one, I forget where at a zoo, but I just remember like a certain amount of hair on their skin.
They have hair, but it's kind of coarse.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not it's not soft. It's kind of coarse hair.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And then of course the Galapagos Islands, Karen. I mean, what in Ecuador and you were maroon there.
Well, we weren't marooned. We were on a boat with people we didn't like
What's the difference?
at all. I mean, not at all.
And tell us why.
Um, there were 6 of us on the boat, and, it was a father and his daughter and 2 women from Montana, and my friend Diane and I are from New York. Let us just say we had but the 2 women and my friend Diane had a very large difference of opinion about almost everything, and I do mean almost everything. And, it got to the point that they could barely look at each other,
Wow.
and his daughter didn't wanna be there at all. And he thought, well, I've got this harem of women, they will just serve me. And I don't know if I can use this language on your podcast, but I'm sure I can. So basically, he'd say, while you're up, could you get me a Coke? And the usual answer was, fuck you,
Right.
you know, because he was just so obnoxious.
Right.
The wildlife was wonderful. I enjoyed the trip, except for these other people. And
Mm.
being on a boat for, I can't remember, 10 or 12 days with people you don't like in very close quarters, and the boat was a little decrepit, made for a less than wonderful trip. I mean,
Right.
not every trip was spectacular, trust me on
Right.
that one,
Yeah.
but most of them were pretty fabulous.
Yeah, and then we haven't even talked about food yet, and you made one statement that I have to take a bit of an issue with, but you said in Venezuela you had the best Italian food outside of Italy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
Um,
crazy.
the Italians, there turns out that, and I don't know if it was pre-Second World War or just post-Second World War, a lot of Italians moved up to Venezuela. And as in, Germans moved to Argentina,
Right.
uh, same thing. And we kept having these meals that were astounding.
Hmm.
They were fabulous, better than food that I've had in New York.
Wow.
And in one case, we went into this restaurant, and there was no menu. We said, we'll bring you food, which they did. And then the chef, who looked like Mama, came out, with her apron dusted in flour and the gray
Right.
hair up in a bun.
Right.
Trust me, she could have been in Italy, except she was in Venezuela.
Right. Right.
And the food was amazing. So, and totally unexpected. I had no idea that this whole area was Italian. Didn't have a
Mm.
clue.
You could take them out of the country, but you can't take the
Yeah,
country out of them.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, and sometimes things the really unexpected happen, and that was one. We had no idea, and we weren't even supposed to be going to Venezuela in the first place.
Mm.
We were supposed to be going to Guatemala, except they had a coup, a slight problem.
Yeah, the stableness of some of those governments, yeah, it certainly can derail a lot of plans. Your 50th birthday though was in Indonesia where you met tribes. That was
No, no, no,
wonderful.
no. That was my 40th
Oh,
birthday.
40th. I'm sorry.
That
Yeah,
was
your
my
four.
40th birthday.
Yeah.
50th birthday is when I took the road trip around the U.S.
Ah,
Yeah, no, I was in Indonesia. I went there by myself for 3 months.
Yeah.
I took a sabbatical, took 6 months off, and it was wonderful. I went to a lot of the islands, and I wrote about several different things that went on there. The one that you're thinking about is on the island of Sulawesi, which most people have not even heard of. And there's a group called the Toraja. And it's a they have very unusual customs. They, surrounding death. And that was why I went. I read an article in National Geographic and saw these pictures and went, I have to see this. This is just too amazing. One of the things that they do, and I learned a lot of other things that they do, is they have these very, very steep cliffs that have caves in them. And each family has a cave, and that's where they lay out the dead.
Wow.
And they've carved a platform in front, and they put effigies that look like the person in front of the cave. And once a year, some member of the family will go down on ropes and change their clothes so that they are well dressed. And they have something called a baby tree, so that if you die during childbirth or I think below age 1, all the babies are planted around these trees so that they help to give new growth. That's the idea. Um, and if that were not amazing enough,
Wow.
um, and it was fabulous. Getting up there was hairy, and getting home was even hairier. But it was amazing. Once I was up there, the the first day that I get up to this area, and I have no idea how I'm going to get around. I just sort
Right.
of, I'll figure it out. This guy walks up to me at breakfast and says, "Are you looking for a guide?" In English, little difficult to understand, but I understood him. Well, I won't go through the whole story, but it turns out that he was the guide for these National Geographic writers.
Wow.
And how I knew this was he said to me, "Yeah, about a year ago or a year and a half ago, whatever it was, I there were people from National Geographic that I took around." And I said, "Funny you should say that." And I pulled out the article, and he'd never
Mm.
seen it. And he took me to something that was even more amazing, which was a housewarming. And the housewarming was um, they build these homes that are enormous and they're beautiful. Um, by the way, if anybody wants to see the pictures of these places, they're on my website. So if you go onto my website and you look for the book, which is Travel Mania, and then it'll s- you'll see a gallery, and for each chapter of the book, there are a bunch of photographs, so you can
Beautiful.
see what these homes look like because
Beautiful. Yeah.
they're really something. Anyhow, and 5 or 6 or 7 families live in this building, and they have a housewarming, but it's not as we would think of a housewarming. The housewarming lasts 5 days,
Hmm.
and people from all over the area come for it. And the first day is chickens, and there's some order to it. The day that I was there was the presenting of the pigs, and people from all these town bring pigs, and then the next day they roast them, and everybody feasts on pig, and that's the final day of the housewarming. And the there was a slope leading down to where the house was, and these teenage boys would hold what looked like a pelican, the way that they used to hold the king, you know,
Mm.
with a cage on top and the pig in it, and they would run down this hill screaming and present it to the owners of the house and then put it off to the side. And it must have happened 30, 40 times. After
Wow.
the fifth one, I had that was very nice, and I was having more fun people watching. And I might add, there were hundreds of people there. I saw two other non-locals
Hmm.
while I was there. So it was pretty remote. And eh, every so often a pig would get loose, and all chaos, total chaos would ensue,
Yeah.
and some people rooting for the pig and some people rooting for the people chasing the pig. But it was fun. It was really fun. And then the denouement to all of this is after we're all done, My guide takes me and says, we're going to go out and have a meal together. Great. And he takes me to his friend's restaurant, which is a very little hole in the wall place, very, very, very clean, but very plain. And he says, wait, wait, wait. And he says, we have a special treat for you. Okay. The special treat was I hear music suddenly.
Huh.
It's Elvis Presley. Heard I was American. We
Right.
had to hear Elvis
Yeah,
Presley.
you have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is somebody actually playing an instrument, or they're just playing the music?
No, they had a tape or yeah.
Oh, I see. I see.
Yeah, no, it was really it was Elvis Presley singing.
Wow. And everybody was friendly there? I mean, this is a very
Oh, yeah.
unique. Everybody's friendly and
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't have any bad experiences in Indonesia. I mean, not a one. And I've been back a couple of times. Um, and it's a country that I really like because except for Bali, there are very few tourists. Bali
really.
is filled with Australians.
Uh,
Um, but apart from Bali, you do not run into tons of tourists.
hmm.
And to me, that's the fun part is going somewhere where the tourists are not.
Right. Right. So if you were to recommend first time traveler to, to Southeast Asia, or even South Asia, like what country would you recommend first for an American?
Thailand.
Really? That's what everybody says. Thailand.
Yeah. Yeah. Thailand is very easy to negotiate. A lot of people
Mm,
speak English. It's exotic in many, many ways, but it's also really easy to negotiate
mm.
and easy to get around. And the food is wonderful. And there's a lot to see and a lot to do. Yeah, I would definitely say go to Thailand.
It's relatively inexpensive. The beaches are beautiful, I hear.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be my if that's where you're gonna if you've never been before, that's where I'd go.
And the minimum amount you can go as as an American, I mean, 7 days? I mean, to really kind of
Well,
get
it's a
a
long flight,
yeah.
and you're going to be jet lagged for a day or two, particularly if you're not used to going on long flights.
Right.
So my suggestion would be try and at least do if you're going to do a week, do both weekends, and I would say 2 weeks
Mm,
personally. I don't think you get to know a place. One of the things, there used to be the movie, if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. You don't want to do that
right.
because you're not going to remember anything and you're not going to have the kinds of experiences that are going to stay with you. They don't have to be as exotic as mine, trust me,
Mm,
for it to be a fabulous trip. But you don't want to be rushing from place to place. It's just no fun packing and unpacking and getting over jet lag and you've just figured out a place and then you're moving to the next one.
mm.
Slow it down.
Right. Right.
And then the other thing that I say to people, and I say this whether you're traveling in the US or you're traveling overseas, find something that you really, really love. Think about it. I'm into gardens. I like art and crafts, and I like, I'm not a foodie, but I like to try different foods. I like going to wineries, so make a list of things that you really enjoy. Plan the trip around the things that you really like. And it doesn't have to be those things. If you're into sports, go see soccer, go see
Right.
rugby, go see whatever it is they're playing in the country that you're going. Go see a cricket match. You'll find it fascinating if you're into sports. I
Right.
wouldn't do it because to me, it's not all that interesting. But if you're not into crafts, why would you want to do what I do?
Mm,
And, I have a nephew who is a fire marshal, and when he travels in the US, goes to fire stations to meet the people. And he always asks them for suggestions about where to eat, and they have great suggestions. Um,
mm.
But that's a way for him to connect with people in other places. It isn't the only thing he does, but it's one of the things that he does.
It's
So
it's amazing just the education that you get. Very quick story. I'm 10 years old, so I live in New Haven. I'm right across the water from you there, Long Island Sound. So, my father, after my third grade, first day of vacation, says, "Joe, Italian immigrant, put your clothes in a suitcase, brings me to the bus station, New Haven, tells the bus driver to drop me off JFK Terminal 1, says, here's a picture of your grandmother. So 10-year-old, doesn't even bring me to JFK, puts me on the
Whoa,
bus. you know,
whoa.
so he'll probably be arrested now if that happened, So, but I fly to Milan, I get off, I look for, my grandmother in the picture, and I meet my uncle for the first time. And so I spend consequently every summer in Italy. And just the education, just the way that they live, the way they speak, the way they communicate, the way they eat, it just gave me such a different perspective that a lot of my friends here just aren't able to receive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. To me, the thing is that if you learn nothing else from travel, what you learn is there is no single right answer. There are
Mm,
many right answers. And there are so many different ways of living on this planet that are so very different. And I'm not judgmental about how anybody lives because you know what? If it works for you, that's great.
yeah.
And it's a very different understanding of how the world works. People do things. I still remember going to Korea. I was talking about the silk market, and I
Yeah.
went there in 2006. And I saw things in 2006 that are just beginning to happen here. They
Hmm.
were so far ahead of us technologically that it astounded me, genuinely astounded me. Um, Nobody used money at all.
Hmm.
I mean, I changed money at the airport, and I remember going in to buy coffee, and the woman looked at the cash and had to ask someone, "What do I do with this?"
Mm.
They don't even use credit cards. They take their phones and swipe it for everything. Now, this was in 2006.
Wow.
And the subway system makes any subway system except the one in Thailand, the one that's in Bangkok, which is pretty spectacular, look old and decrepit.
Hmm.
I mean, it is as modern can be. And again, 2006, they had an app that didn't speak a word of Korean. We could get around anywhere with
Wow.
zero trouble because it translated it. It said, walk here, follow this, go do that. Now they have it in New York now, but this was 15 years ago.
Wow. Wow.
And it was quite the eye opener. It was really quite the eye opener. They had at that point, every city bus was either hybrid or electric.
Hmm.
So, we think we're always, in the forefront of everything. And you go around the world and you go, maybe not. We are certainly in some things, but not everything.
I remember even I went to see the World Cup in 2008. It was 2000. No, I'm not. But I remember even the billboards on the side of the highway were all digital, and
Right.
it wasn't here at all yet. They were still
Exactly.
paper. They were still
Right.
pushing up paper, and that's yeah. So I mean, people need to travel. We need to see these other cultures. We need to see how other people live. I think it's essential.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, one of my goals, I still remember, when the publisher said, you have to fill out all this stuff. And, so what's the goal of this book?
Hmm.
I said, well, one is to entertain people because
Hmm.
it's fun. And the other is I want to convince people that it really is fabulous and they should go travel.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons that I love doing podcasts like this. And, I've actually gotten a surprising amount of media attention. Um, and it's because I really, really want people to get out there and explore. And it doesn't have to be the most exotic places in the world. As you say, go to Italy and you're going to see very different lifestyle and experience it than what we live here. And
Yeah.
it's true just about anywhere you go.
And no judgment, it's just different, not better or worse, it's just different. And
Yeah,
and appreciate that, the way we do things isn't the way people do it elsewhere. I mean,
right.
just here we're innocent until proven guilty. In Europe it's the complete opposite. And just the reverse of that logic itself lends itself to so many other things. It's just
Absolutely.
um it's fascinating. Well, Karen Gershowitz, you've reached that goal. I mean, that this book is the stories are great. It makes me want to travel more. I'm planning a European. My father's not doing well in Italy. I want to go see him, and it's tough with all the restrictions.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll be
Yeah.
lifted. And let's talk. How can people get your book, Travel Mania? Great read.
It's everywhere, pretty much. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. If you go to IndieBound, you can get it from an independent bookseller. If they don't have it, ask for it. Easy to order. It's on a. We have a Kindle version.
Yeah.
Don't have an audio version yet, but do have a Kindle version. And as I say, go on to my website, because that'll direct you if you can't find it anywhere else. And my website is KarenGershowitz.com. So very easy to find.
Absolutely. I'll put it in the show notes. I'll put the link to Amazon as well. You're on Facebook, you're on Instagram. Absolute pleasure. Karen, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait for the second book, and maybe we could talk again then.
You bet. I'm having a good time writing it with all different stories in all different places. So it was great talking with you. Thank you so much.
Very well. Thank you so much. You be well. Bye now.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources, and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.